Hello, everybody. Welcome to Justice Matters. I am thrilled today to be sitting down with not only a candidate for Congress from the 41st District in California, but a former federal prosecutor. So I always perk up a little bit when I get to sit down with one of my fellow colleagues in the Department of Justice who understands the hard work of representing the people of the United States. And this particular former prosecutor has chosen to try to continue his public service, continue representing the people of his district in California as a member of Congress. So I want to welcome Will Rollins to Justice Matters.
Thanks, Glenn, for having me. Happy to be here.
I want to start by asking you to tell our viewers a little bit about your background, about your experience, your work as a federal prosecutor, an assistant United States attorney, because I know how formative it was for me to be able to vindicate the rights of victims, protect the community, protect the rights of each and every defendant that we were prosecuting to make sure they got a fair shake. So I understand the experiences and the skill set you learned and the dedication to public service that is a product of the work that we both did as federal prosecutors. So can you share with our viewers a little bit about your work as a federal prosecutor?
I miss that job every day. Absolutely loved it. And very different from politics and running a congressional campaign. And I had a steep learning curve after I quit that job to run for office. And that was a job that I had tried to get for a very long time, going all the way back to really high school when I was a junior and walked into my first class of the day on September 11th, 2001, saw the North Tower collapse, thought about enlisting in the US military, but don't ask, don't tell was still in place. And I was closeted and petrified of being outed. So I didn't want to give up on doing something in national security. So I went to Dartmouth. I took Arabic. I applied to the CIA, sucked at Arabic and never heard back from the CIA. So that was not going to be my path, but eventually made it to Columbia Law School. And I was clerking for a judge on the Ninth Circuit in Pasadena. And she said, if you're interested in national security, you should become a federal prosecutor because the Central District of California has a national security division. So I took her advice, applied, was lucky enough to be hired, and absolutely loved the job. Got to work with FBI squads on threats from Russia, China, Iran, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. But I was hired originally to join the general crime section in that office in 2016, 6 weeks before the presidential election. And after that election, if you worked in federal law enforcement, really anywhere in the United States, what started happening? Well, huge rise in the threats from domestic terrorism, whether it was the neo-Nazis who attacked Charlottesville, right? Or QAnon conspiracy theorists who attacked US Navy hospital ships because they thought COVID was part of a government plot. I mean, one of my cases at DOJ involved a train engineer who derailed a train towards the US Navy hospital ship Mercy when it was docked at the port of Los Angeles. And then January 6th, when there were about 24 people who flew back to Southern California after attacking the US Capitol. And I had a very small role in helping my colleagues in the DC U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI agents there track down the targets in our district before the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And even though that role was small, it had a very profound impact on me because while I was doing that, my opponent, Ken Calvert, was voting to decertify the election, voting against the January 6th committee to even investigate what had happened. And then final straw for me, called for dropping charges even after it was clear that 140 cops had been injured, with 5 later dying as a result of that attack. So I got pissed off and left a job I loved because I felt like the people who enabled the attack on the US Capitol no longer deserved to work inside that building. And the good news is we're going to finish the job after a 2022 closest midterm Calvert had ever had in 30 years. We've now got 7 days and a much better shot of flipping the seat on November 5th.
How do you think your skills and your experiences as a federal prosecutor will translate to representing the constituents of your district out there in California in Congress?
At the end of the day, you're an advocate when you're in the House of Representatives. And as you know from working in federal courtrooms, to be an advocate, you have to understand a lot of complex issues. You have to understand the way that federal law works. You have to understand how to fight for your client, whether it's the United States of America or the people of California's 41st district. And you have to be willing to work your ass off. And as you know, being an AUSA is a hard job. It's a time-consuming job. It's a demanding job, but it's an incredibly rewarding job. And so one of the things that I'm most focused on in this campaign and when I get elected is on policies that will help lower the cost of housing, for example, for people in the Inland Empire, which is probably the number one issue, not just cost of living, but cost of housing in particular, that I know voters in my district are really focused on. And having worked in the federal court system for my entire career, I think I'm really well positioned to take that experience and apply it to not just advocacy for my constituents, but also understanding the practical consequence of the way that federal legislation works, right? And that's a product of litigating and being in front of a lot of federal judges throughout my career.
Yeah, and there's something very special about standing up in court every day and announcing Glenn Kirshner or Will Rollins for the United States. One of the reasons I'm so excited about Kamala Harris's candidacy is because, kind of like us when we were federal prosecutors, she has had one client most of her professional career, the people. And that's something that you learn as a prosecutor, and I don't think it ever leaves you. We're not in it to line our own pockets. We're in it to serve the public. And regarding lining his own pockets, we'll talk more about your opponent, Ken Calvert, in a minute. But I know you said affordable housing is going to be one of your priorities when you're elected. What will your other priorities be when you're serving in Congress?
Another huge issue for Riverside County is infrastructure. And I always say traffic sucks no matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, right? And if you're sitting there and you're on hour 2 of gridlock traffic and you're looking at the car to the right of you, you're not wondering, is that dude a Republican or is that person a Democrat, right? You're just thinking about how brutal it is that you can't get home to spend time with your kids, your nieces and nephews after a long day at work. And I'm running against somebody who voted against the largest bipartisan infrastructure bill in U.S. history, which is bringing $300 million to Riverside County over his objection. And it's helping to fund projects like the 9171 exchange in Corona, which is designed to make traffic a little bit better for people. And it's also creating 6-figure jobs in a county where the median income is $70,000 per household. And we need more of those dollars to help lift wages for people who are struggling with inflation right now. And I think folks deserve a member of Congress who's going to, again, take those advocacy skills and really fight to bring those dollars back to the district and to be honest with their constituents about their votes. I mean, one of my favorite things that Calvert has been doing, the hypocrisy of it, is to vote against that bipartisan infrastructure bill and then turn around and try to take dollars from it. And Politico just did a great story about that, I think a week or two ago, because people just can't stand the hypocrisy, and they deserve also a member of Congress who's going to be honest. And tying back to your first question, right? One of the things about being a federal prosecutor and standing up in court is you are bound by ethical rules to be honest. You are bound to follow the facts and the law. And we need more people like that in Congress. We need people who are willing to tell the truth, who understand that if you lie, if you divide, it's counterproductive for progress. It makes no sense from a policy standpoint. It's impossible to solve problems if you can't actually follow the evidence towards a solution. And that's what folks in the Inland Empire, I think, are really craving across party lines right now.
And the difference on the ethical front between you and your opponent couldn't be more stark, as when I read about, he may have been against the infrastructure bill, but didn't he introduce an earmark that actually ended up working to his significant financial advantage personally? Am I right about that?
Yes, there's been a lot of reporting about that. And this is a guy who, when I was 8 years old, 1992, that was his first term in Congress. And since 1992, he has seen his net worth go up by $20 million, in part by earmarking transportation projects near his own real estate investments, engaging in what is essentially insider trading in real property. So he tips off his business partners before the earmark comes in, buys up the plot of land, earmark becomes public, value skyrockets, he turns around and flips it for an enormous profit. And that's why a big part of this campaign has been around anti-corruption reform that should apply to people in both parties. And that's driven by my career in law enforcement. I think we need to ban members of Congress from trading stock. We need to ban insider trading in real estate by members of Congress. We need to have a lifetime ban on lobbying by former members of Congress. We need to end Citizens United so we finally get dark money out of our system, because nothing teaches you how corrupt the system actually is as a result of money better than running for Congress and needing to raise $12 million to flip a congressional seat. I mean, nobody should have to raise that kind of money, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican in America, to win a congressional election. Our system is so fundamentally broken. And I think part of the reason we're building such a broad coalition in this district is because there's only one candidate talking about fixing the system itself, because people are rightfully pissed off at Congress, and they deserve more public servants in the House who are actually going to fix the system long term and prove to the American people that Congress can police itself.
When you talk about those ethical abuses by guys like Ken Calvert, it literally makes my blood pressure rise. We need to reform ethics in government in so many ways. I talk often about the need for a renaissance of ethics in government. One of the proposals I have is to add 22 words to the federal oath of office that makes everybody a mandatory reporter of crime and corruption by all government employees and officials. That way, gone are the days of, having to protect those magical unicorns, the whistleblowers, because everybody has a responsibility by their oath to report crime and corruption. I wish it wasn't that way, but it seems like we have so many of these Ken Calvert types who entrench themselves in Congress only to enrich themselves rather than doing the work of their constituents. And maybe it's because of some of these abuses that we're discussing perpetrated by Calvert that watchdog, an ethics watchdog group, CREW, the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, a nonprofit, and they do great work, named Calvert one of the top 5 most corrupt members of Congress. How's that for a badge of distinction? Those are the kind of people that we need to move out of Congress and install folks like you who did spend their time representing the people of the United States, being bound by and taking deadly seriously our code of ethics. Yes, we have to clear out guys like Calvert from lining his own pockets and serving himself rather than his constituents.
Definitely. And I always say, if Fox News has done a 7-minute documentary talking about your Republican opponent's corruption, that guy should not be in Congress. And I was probably the only candidate in the country in 2022 at the House level and 2024 who could use a clip of Fox News talking about his Republican opponent's corruption and run that ad on Fox News, which is what we did in both cycles. And I mean, even his own Republican colleagues, you can go back and look at the reporting in The Hill about this. His own Republican colleagues in the House tried to keep him off the Appropriations Committee because they were worried about ethical issues. And the FBI has investigated this guy twice, according to public media reports. And I think anytime you're seeing that much smoke, right, it doesn't really matter whether this is actually illegal or unethical. We shouldn't be having that debate about somebody who's serving us in Congress. And we need to elect people who actually want to close loopholes so that whatever is unethical is actually illegal under federal law, and that there are real meaningful penalties for people in both parties. And to your point, I mean, just look at the current Congress, right? No party has a monopoly on corruption. You can see the convicted felons from this current Congress as proof of that: George Santos and Bob Menendez, right? So I think most people really just want to see some accountability. And that's part of the way we can channel the populism in the country right now and the populist anger at DC into productive long-term reform that actually attracts better people to serve us in the federal government at the elected level.
Well, it feels like it's time for a renaissance of ethics in the 41st Congressional District in California, and I'm glad that you are going to be the one to bring it to them. Let me shift gears a little bit because, we are at this extraordinarily dangerous moment, I think, in our nation's history when we have a Republican nominee for president who is an abject criminal, convicted felon 34 times over pending sentencing. It's driven me to distraction that this man is on release, both pretrial release and pre-sentence release, and he continues to endanger the population, enormous swaths of the population, whether it's the Haitian American population, whether it's our FEMA workers. Donald Trump lies about, FEMA relief efforts, and the militias go out, his little play militias, hunting FEMA. And as we both know, Will, if somebody was on pretrial and pre-sentence release and there was clear and convincing evidence they posed a danger to even one member of the community, they would be revoked on release so fast it would make their head spin, but the laws don't seem to apply to Donald Trump. But let me ask you about what we just learned. In fact, today, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson confirmed that he has a, quote, little secret in place with Donald Trump to try to guarantee that Donald Trump takes power regardless of the election's results. I mean, this is a really dangerous moment in our nation's history. How do you see these challenges, and what do you think it is we need to do to address this and prevent it from happening again?
It reminds me of the reason I did this in the first place. It's the Beverly Hills salon owner standing on the steps of the U.S. Capitol with a bullhorn, calling for angry patriots to bring in their gas masks and weapons to stop the peaceful transfer of power, and then standing in a hallway as a Capitol police officer is crushed in a door, screaming out in pain by her fellow rioters. And when you have people like the Speaker of the House, second in line to the presidency, responsible for the certification, and you have Mike Johnson, the architect of the original, arguably criminal legal strategy. We know parts of that were definitely criminal, right? Mike Johnson orchestrating that effort to overturn the last election, and now saying what you just said about this morning, right? I mean, it's terrifying. And it's a reminder of why the House of Representatives is the firewall in this election. We have to make sure that the Speaker's gavel belongs to Hakeem Jeffries on January 6th of 2025, because every single one of those Republicans that are still in the House, virtually all of them, the only ones who stood up have essentially been purged from the party, right? Those folks voted to decertify almost every single one that's still in the House. A lot of them have voted to decertify that last election. And they joined the lawsuit to overturn the last election in the case of my opponent, right? So it is incumbent upon all of us as Americans, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing over the next 7 days, to focus on the impact of this election on the future of our democracy, on our republic, because everything that we do in the next 7 days is going to echo throughout American history. And there is no more urgent moment since the 1860s for our republic than we're in right now.
And let me ask you, as we wind down, prosecutors are typically not all that fond of pardons, because pardons, to my way of thinking, are enormously damaging to victims, to grand juries, to trial juries, to judges, to everybody who has gone about trying to hold somebody accountable for their crimes. It can be a danger to the community. And yet Donald Trump is promising pardons for the January 6th insurrectionists, the folks who attacked the Capitol. I want you to comment on that a little bit. And frankly, in DC, I backed the blue my entire career, and I worked with the blue. I required them to police honestly and ethically, and unfortunately from time to time I had to prosecute police officers who let down the community and didn't take their oath to protect and serve seriously. But just thinking about the fact that Donald Trump doesn't back the blue, and it seems the same could be said of Calvert, because he voted to decertify, and he also, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, signed on to that bogus civil suit to try to overturn the election's results. They don't back the blue. They back those who beat the blue, plain and simple. But what is your take on all of this talk of pardons and how corrosive it actually is, not only to our criminal justice system, but to our democracy?
Well, you just hit the nail on the head, because you cannot claim to back the blue and then pardon people who beat the shit out of cops. And that's what people like Donald Trump are promising to do. And Ken Calvert's going to be right there with him. It's the reason Calvert called for dropping charges against people who assaulted the U.S. Capitol. It's the reason Calvert said that the FBI has been infiltrated by rot. It's the reason Calvert voted to defund federal law enforcement. And so I always tell people in my communities, I think most of us want to see both local police and federal law enforcement fully funded, because we believe that nobody is above the law, right? And one of the other cases to me that was most troubling, having served in the National Security Division in our office, was the classified documents case, right? It's, of course, an effort to overturn the last election, but we've also got a guy who kept, according to the media reporting, some of the country's most highly classified nuclear weapons secrets in his bathroom. And that can cost lives. It can cost lives of our assets. It can cost lives of our intelligence officers serving overseas. And this is from a party that used to be the party of law and order, small government, standing up to Russia, the rule of law. And they have completely abandoned any pretense of that. And they've now got a convicted felon as their nominee and a party that is completely kowtowing to this guy. So we have to do everything we can in the next 7 days to flip seats like California 41. And if folks want to help us out, they can go to willrollinsforcongress.com. There were 30,000 Democrats in this district who didn't vote in 2022, and we need them to show up in 2024. So if you're in Southern California and want to help us knock doors, I would say to anybody watching this, please go to our website. We really need you, because if our turnout is high enough, we're going to flip this seat. And it is one of just the 4 that we need to retake the House majority and make sure that that speaker's gavel belongs to Hakeem Jeffries instead of Mike Johnson on January 6, 2025.
Yeah, Will, that was going to be my last question. How can people find you? How can they get involved? How can they help beyond obviously donating to your campaign? So I'm glad you broached that subject. And yeah, we have a lot of problems that we're going to have to contend with. We have a lot that we need to fix. The good news is I think we're up to the challenge. I happen to believe that come election day, we're going to begin moving into the light, and then we're going to have to keep an eye on what Trump and Johnson and the other bad actors try to do. I mean, they had 5 little secrets to try to steal the presidency the last time around, and Donald Trump and some of his criminal associates are being prosecuted for those, 5 little secret corrupt schemes that they deployed. And here we go with a 6th. I do hope there's some proactive law enforcement going on and investigating going on at my beloved Department of Justice, and we're not just sitting back waiting to react. But Will, I wish you the best of luck. I know that you are part of sort of the new generation of folks who actually care about honor and ethics, integrity, and representing the people of your district rather than lining your own pockets like your opponent. And I wish you the best of luck. And I appreciate you sitting down and talking with our Justice Matters audience today.
Thank you, Glenn. Justice does matter. And let's make sure it prevails on November 5th. So thank you so much for having me on.